It's time for Miss Ann Moss Rogers. Take it away.
I was sitting in a police car in a parking lot with my husband when the officer delivers the news that they had found my son dead. The cause of death was suicide, and we were shocked. The method left no question. I thought, how could I be such a crummy mother that my child would check out on me? But it wasn't about me. I didn't understand why suicide, and it would be a long time before I would. My son Charles was 20 when he died, and he was the funniest, most popular kid in school. He was 6'1", 130 pounds, with a head full of beautiful brown curly hair. But behind his funny man facade, he suffered from depression and thoughts of suicide we never knew about. And drugs and alcohol became his antidote to soothe the pain he was feeling. And it wasn't until he was 17 years old, he was actually diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And from the time he was 15 in 2010 until his death 5 years later, we went to a lot of mental health professionals. And I kept asking for a diagnosis. They kept saying we needed more testing, none of which resulted in them telling me what the diagnosis was. And we actually didn't get that until he was in an inpatient program. I didn't know the magic words psychological evaluation. They would tell me that he was high risk, but they never explained exactly what those words meant, and attempts to follow up resulted in unreturned phone calls. What surprised me was that the medical and mental health system, people what I expected to support and help us, were the most judgmental and prejudiced. When I would ask a question about suicide, that word would dangle in the air unanswered, and they would glaze right past it. So I thought it wasn't relevant to our family and my son. And both my son and I were shamed multiple times for his drug use, when what we really needed was compassion and understanding. I felt lonely. I felt desperate. He lost faith in the system, and from there went his compliance. And that's when his drug use really escalated. He eventually ended up going into rehab for a heroin addiction. And from there, he went to recovery house to live. And he had just gotten settled in, and 24 hours later, he relapsed. So from the time he relapsed until his death by suicide was exactly 2 weeks. We had very little contact with him during that period. But he came into contact with the healthcare system for some kind of treatment on 3 different occasions. One was a hospital in which they did a whole physical workup to see if he could go through the detox process again. The second was when he went to the doctor for an ankle sprain, his regular doctor. And the third one was when the house manager took him to a psych hospital after his relapse to do a mental health evaluation. And they refused him because they didn't take those patients, meaning that because he was addicted to a drug, they didn't want anything to do with him. Now, I don't know if a screening would have saved his life, but those were nevertheless missed opportunities. And suicide wasn't on my radar because no one was talking about it. And after his death, I decided someone needed to. I was grief-stricken. I was terrified of going public with this subject. But I wrote a newspaper article I thought no one would ever read, and it ended up going viral. And I started this blog called Emotionally Naked to find healing through writing and shine a spotlight on the taboo topics of mental illness, addiction, suicide, and grief. You know, those topics no one wants to talk about. And it wasn't long after launching that blog that I had a really tough day, and I wrote an article about how we reacted to my son's suicide. And I wondered why I wrote it. And then I get a message from a girl named Lauren that said, 2 days ago, I thought about taking my life. Reading a post from a mother who's felt such devastating pain has changed my perspective on life. She then reached out to her own parents and asked for help. And you know what? That blog post merely validated what she already wanted to do. And that's when I realized that people who are thinking of suicide want desperately to tell. Only we don't offer them those opportunities. We don't invite them. She had seen that article, the post from my blog, on a friend of her mother's Facebook page. And that's when I started to think from my perspective as a digital marketing expert. I started using something called search engine optimization and content marketing skills I once used to get plumbers more leads online. But instead I wanted to reach those Googling ways to die with the goal of saving lives. Because I figured out that's what my son had done. I thought, people go to Google or search engines to find out how to install a faucet. I bet they Google how to die too. So at that point, I merged my passion to prevent suicide with my marketing expertise. And I wrote this first how-to article, and it was written for the express purpose of showing up at the top of Google when people would type in the words about this specific method of killing themselves. And the purpose was to compete with all these other websites that offered step-by-step instructions on this way to die. My article, of course, did not offer instructions, but instead offered hope and resources. And it took about 6 months before it finally landed at the top of Google, number 6 worldwide when those words were typed in. And since it was written 3 years ago, hundreds of thousands of people have clicked on that title in Google. They've come back time and time again. They've landed on the article or the video on YouTube. What I find interesting is that statistical evidence shows that people have contacted the crisis resources listed there. That we already know. But the interesting thing is how they'll kind of hang around the site afterwards. Often they'll go to practical step-by-step articles like, how do I tell someone I want to die? Because we don't really tell them, how do you choose someone and what do you say? And I offer exactly how to do that. Why should I stay alive when I want to kill myself? That's another one. Some engage in conversation through comments. Some email me through the contact form. And through the years, I've been doing this for about 5 years, I've been able to use behavior modification skills and my suicide prevention training. And I've been able to build something of a labyrinth of help-seeking articles within those pages to keep people clicking and engaged, putting more time between thought and action. When they go there, they know that somebody cares. Since then, I've added probably 50 more articles that answer people's burning questions. And some of those are things like, what do I say to a friend who's cutting? I get messages like, this blog post saved my life last night. Thanks to this article, my daughter told me about her plans to suicide. Those messages never get old. And although I'm hopeful there will be a focus on more upstream strategies like coping skills training for young people, and that mental health conversations will be more normalized across healthcare systems and in schools, I don't think we can ignore that kids will continue to seek answers from the internet. So how can we rise to that challenge? I'm hoping we can integrate digital content marketing strategies to create a robust system of prompting help seeking, all of which can work while we sleep, therefore saving lives and extending valuable resources. This works. You know, people post a comment in what feels like a cold and uncaring world, and someone answers. All it takes is one human that cares. And why do I do this? As funny and as talented as my son Charles was, his greatest gift was letting other people know that they matter. And through this online effort, I'm able to carry his legacy forward every single day, and all of that has helped me find emotional healing. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so honored to be part of this summit.
Thank you, Ann Moss and Chris. Thank you to all the speakers, but particularly the two of you for sharing your lived experiences. I know I can speak on behalf of everybody at this meeting that we are so deeply grateful that you were able to share your very personal stories with all of us.